Um, we are happy that you decided to attend. This is the second developer presentation on the Esperanza Hills project. This is not a county-sponsored informational meeting. This is strictly sponsored by the developer. No decisions will be made tonight. But for your convenience, we have brought in a court reporter tonight so that she can take down any of your questions, and they will be included in the environmental review process. And we also have a videographer here who will be helping along in that process. Because the questions presented tonight will be part of the official record, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask their questions and, more importantly, get their questions answered. And we want to make sure that the court reporter as well as the videographer are able to hear what the questions are. So we ask your patience and professionalism and most of all courtesy as we go through the process tonight. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the draft environmental impact report. If you haven't, it's available online at the County Planning Services website. And if you're a very fast reader, you can skim through all 7 volumes that are at a table back here tonight. If you have any specific questions about how the EIR is put together, I'm sure that the representatives from, California CAA Planning of Aliso Viejo, they are the ones that actually wrote and prepared the environmental impact report. And they're back there tonight and can also answer some questions for you. Tonight, Doug Wymore, who is the developer, is going to go through, he's going to begin by going through the whole project and give you an overview of what we are talking about here. That will be followed by Michael Huff, who is our consultant with Duduk Fire Protection and Urban Forestry, and he will present the fire protection plan, which I'm sure, given today's news, you're all especially curious about what that would be. The question and answer period will come afterwards, and in order to make it fair and as inclusive as possible, we're asking you to fill out a card so that we can call you in the order that we receive it, and that way you don't have to form a long line and everybody has to stand through all the questions. I'll be calling your names. If you do fill out a card, put it face down here, and then I can pick it up and we'll have it right in the order. If you want to wait a while and see what questions come to mind, you can do that, or you can put your name in now, and it'll probably come up sooner in the process. It's up to you. You'll have 3 minutes to ask your question, and I suggest that you try to get your question well formed in your mind so that they can answer it as clearly as possible. Doug will either answer the question himself or direct it to one of our other technical experts here on the panel. But more than anything else, we really want to make sure that your questions get answered tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the California Environmental Quality Act and the CEQA process. Some of you may be very familiar with it, others might not. But CEQA is a California law that was passed over 40 years ago to help decision makers understand the environmental impacts of a project and the mitigation measures that are involved with that project. The CEQA produces a document which is called an Environmental Impact Report, or an EIR for short. And what we're talking about tonight is the draft Environmental Impact Report. So some people will refer to it as a DEIR or an EIR, but basically that is the document that we're referring to this evening. It considers the environmental impacts only, things like traffic, habitat, water, air quality, that sort of thing. An EIR does not consider other very important factors in a project, which might be issues such as the economics of a project, job creation, market forces, housing demand, or financing. So those things are not a part of, because it, as the name implies, it's an environmental impact report. The EIR does not in itself approve or disapprove a project, and this is really important to understand. The EIR is essentially a neutral project. It looks at all of the impacts in a very neutral way. It's used primarily by decision makers to disclose, and that's the most important function of an EIR is to disclose and to also put into context the impacts of a project by comparing it to other alternatives. And when you talk to the ladies from CAA back there, they'll explain to you what the other alternatives are, so forth. And that gives you sort of an order of magnitude, a way to put the project into perspective as to what could be there in other circumstances. So with that, where we are, this slide shows us where we are in the CEQA process today. That little red dot, we have prepared the draft environmental impact report. The lead agency, which is the county, not the developer, has put out a notice of completion of the EIR. I'm sorry, this microphone is going on and off. Are you all hearing me okay? And so now we are in the public public review process, and that's why we're having this meeting here, because it is a complex and a very involved document. And so to assist you in reviewing it, we're holding these meetings so that you have a chance to get your questions out, have a plain language explanation of what the EIR is about, and we'll take it from there. The next step would be the lead agency, or the county in this case, reviews all of the questions that you submit, and a final document is prepared. So thank you very much for your patience and your courtesy, and we'll get started. I'll turn it over to Doug now.
Public outreach on August 23rd, 2012. There were a lot of you in the room at the time, and when we had that outreach, a lot of you told us you need to worry about evacuation, you need to worry about fire, you need to worry about traffic, you need to worry about these other things. So we took notes on that, and then after that particular meeting, I had a group of people come up to me and say, you know what, this fire was terrifying, it was terrible, nothing was done. We don't believe OCFA, we don't believe these other people, we don't think anybody did anything. And you're going to have to go find that out, because if you don't find that out, your project's going to fail. So it was very blank, very stark, very revealing. What we did is we went through then from there, and we tried to go through and find out exactly what did happen. So to start the meeting, most of you already know where the project is, but for those of you that don't, we basically sit in an unincorporated area of Orange County. It sits to the east of San Antonio and then to the north of Stonehaven via De Agua. Next slide. So what I'm trying to do in this meeting is I have some goals. And we've already provided...
They're having trouble hearing you.
Oh, is that better? I'm sorry. Let me get down here. All right, so I want to provide an overview of where the Esperanza Hills project is in the CEQA process. The county's issued the draft EIR. They've done the notice of availability. You guys now get a chance to comment on that. When you do any comments, you can do them written, and we have the sheets back there. You can shoot them in by email. We have a court reporter here, and we're going to prepare a transcript, and that transcript will be forwarded to the county at the end of the meeting. And every comment that you give will be forwarded to the county in that transcript. We also have a videotape going that we're going to send over to the county so that they can see what happened at the meeting. So if you want to get up, and we've given 3-minute limits because there are so many of you and we don't know how many want to talk, but we want to give everybody a chance to make a comment. You can come up and ask questions, we'll answer them, or you can just come up and make a comment as to what you like or don't like and sit down and nobody will bother you. But at least that way you get it on the record. The other thing that we wanted to do about this process is there's 7 volumes back there that you see that was part of the draft EIR. And those were all compiled after we spent a lot of time and a lot of work. And Gary Lamb, who's sitting up here, is my partner, who was the architect that designed it. Next to him is Mike Huff, who's with Dudek, who prepared a fire protection report for us, and he'll give you a presentation. Tony Baumkamp is our traffic engineer. Kyle Mayberry is our traffic engineer. Sitting next to him is Tony Baumkamp, who is our biologist, who's also working with the Corps of Engineers. Ken Crawford's the civil engineer, sitting to his immediate left. Shauna Schaffner's with CAA Planning, who's the lady and her organization that helped us prepare the EIR. Jeff Hull is the geologist that went out on site and oversaw all the borings and the half-mile of trenching that we did out there to locate the Whittier Fault. You don't have to direct your questions to me. You can direct your questions to any of them on any of the technical issues, or you can just find out where the information sits in the EIR. Now, a lot of you did do comments on our NOP scoping, and for those of you that did, we tried to send CDs out with the EIR in the mail, so many of you have received that. I've also received emails from people wanting CDs, and I've tried to mail those out. The purpose of all this is to make this a document that has full disclosure and has your involvement in it. So the purpose of the meeting is to get you to talk. Whether you like it, don't like it, hate it, it doesn't matter. We want your comments, we want your concerns. And if you get those comments on the record, then the county will go through and they will look at them, and then we will sit down and say, okay, does this document need to be changed, drafted? Does it have everything in it? And then the decision makers can go on. The goal of this meeting, particularly for us, is to describe the freeway fire after action reports that were authored by the various agencies, because we went through and we found them and we talked to those agencies. We'll also show you the fire safety considerations we incorporated into this, because after we talked to all of the various firefighters and all of the others, we designed some safety considerations into it, both for biology and other things, to provide some fire breaks and some other things, and we'll show those to you. We had traffic control evacuation issues, and so what we did was we went and talked to the city about it, and with the Orange County Sheriff's Department coming in, what happened was, after our initial April 2012 public outreach meeting, the city passed a resolution, I think it was September of 2012, to have an evacuation plan drafted. There wasn't one in place prior to that time, and there wasn't one in place during the 2008 freeway fire. There's with Orange County Sheriff's Department coming in, Lieutenant Bob Wren then went in and drafted an evacuation plan, which was given to the public at a meeting at Yorba Linda Community Center 3 months ago. But the plan needed a little bit of explaining because he showed it to you on a map and it was in vector things. So we'll show you that and we'll break it down a little bit and show you how it affects this area. We had a lot of questions about traffic capacities on San Antonio, Stonehaven, and Villa de Agua. And in the recent Cielo Vista meeting that I attended, those questions were posed, but there were no answers. We have capacities that we outlined, and we'll show you those in here, and we'll show you how our project would change and also other projects would change them. We'll provide answers to any other questions you have, but in particular water storage, density, the geotechnical considerations, and then you'll have an opportunity to do anything else. Next slide, please. Where we are in the CEQA process, as Meg showed you, is basically we're at the point where the draft EIR has been circulated, it's open for comment. The comments are going to come in. The final timeline is February 3rd. Once February 3rd rolls around and we get a chance to review all those comments, we're going to respond to all those comments. So every comment that comes in will be responded to. If there's a lot of comments that say the same thing, then they'll be responded to in bulk. Then we'll sit down with the county and there will be a decision made as to whether or not the EIR with the response to comments is adequate, whether it needs to be recirculated, changed, and so on. Next slide, please. The after-incident reports that we found were one from the City of Brea Police Department that's available on, I believe, the Yorba Linda City website. The OCFA report and the presentations that were done after that, and that's available on the OCFA website. OCFA is Orange County Fire Authority. And then there's the Yorba Linda Water District, who also did an after-action report, and it was available on their website. I couldn't get it the other day, so I'm not sure if they're reactivating that or not. We also attended meetings after we reviewed those reports with OCFA, both on-site and off-site, multiple meetings. We attended meetings with the City of Yorba Linda. We attended meetings with the Yorba Linda Water District. and we attended meetings with the Chino Hills State Park. I don't know if you guys remember, but our original August outreach meeting, Ron Creeper from the state park stood up and said, have you looked at our manual for our park, and have you read this, and you're right next to the park, you need to review all this information. We reviewed all that information. Then we met with him 2 or 3 times. And in particular, one particular provision in there was on the fire management plan. This was an older document. It had a section on a fire management plan and what they were going to do about it. It hadn't been finalized. It hadn't been drafted. Then they drafted it. Then they didn't send it to me, and then they quit meeting with me. I will just absolutely tell you as we sit here, they have no fire management plan. The fire management plan for the park, as I understand it today, is that it's going to burn when the fire hits. We reviewed the fire history that was done. Hills for Everyone, which is an entity that we've met with a couple of times, prepared a fire study and forwarded it to the Yorba Linda, and I think made a presentation to the council. We met with them. We reviewed their study. Mike Huff came up with a study of his own. They had a fire on their study that we didn't have because theirs came back and got it from a different database, so we went back through, pulled that one up, and we looked at that history of fires. In general terms, I will tell you that what's happened is in this particular area, since 1876, there have been 3 fires. There was one in 1943 that we didn't pick up. There was one in 1980 called the Al Fire. There was one in 2008, which is the Freeway Complex Fire. All 3 of those fires burned through this area. And what's happening in the park as we talk to the park, and what's happening throughout the Chino Hills State Park is the vegetation has changed. It used to be where fires would go through and be devastating fires every 50, 60 years or so. You can see the cycles cut down, and what's happened is non-native vegetation's got in, and as the non-native vegetation gets in, you end up with brush. So your fires aren't going to be as big, but they're going to be easier to start, and particularly near the roadways. And that's exactly what's happened. You're starting to have a bunch of smaller fires near the roadways around Chino Hills State Park. It was important for us to learn what was going on in Chino Hills State Park, what was causing fires, and what caused the fires here. That's why we retained Dudek Urban Forestry to go through once we came up with a design and tell us whether that design was any good or not. Along the way, we went and talked to OCFA's Weeds and Seeds guys, their wildland specialist, George Ewing. And he indicated that years ago he had talked to the park biologist about this very problem, and they thought about needing fire breaks to protect people that were on the edge. So we thought it would be a good idea to put a fire break under the Southern California Edison wire, since that was an easement on our property, and that we'd be able to break it from there. That's not going to work. We've been out to the site, so we redesigned it, and I'll show you that as we keep going. And finally, we talked to neighbors, firefighters, the sheriff, and a lot of people were on site at the day. Lieutenant Bob Bren was out on site that particular day. A lot of the neighbors that showed up at the August meeting have come up and talked to me. Some of them have yelled at me, but at the end of the day, everybody's described what their experience was and what happened out there. And we've also gone through and looked at all the videos and saw what happened. And we've also looked at other fires to see what their characteristics are, to see what we could do, aside from the things that I talked to you about in the initial meeting, which is putting up a development that had hardened homes and so on and so forth. Next slide. All right, so these were what we learned, and basically some of this I've already told you, but Brea Police Department was unable to get control of any of the intersections. There was absolutely no evacuation plan. And so when things started coming through and they dumped traffic off the freeways of the 91 and the 57, it backed up Yorba Linda. So when you folks couldn't get out of your neighborhood, it wasn't a function of the streets particularly in your neighborhood or how many of you were trying to get out of your neighborhood. It was a function that you had nowhere to go. Everybody was coming in, and that's one of the things in my talks with Lieutenant Wren that he keeps emphasizing to me. Your development can be evacuated. These other neighborhoods can be evacuated, but you could put in an 8-lane highway and it isn't going to help anybody. I need to get a traffic control evacuation plan that's going to work for the entire town. I need to control things on Yorba Linda, La Palma, Esperanza. I need to make sure that if somebody comes off the freeway, they're headed down La Palma or down Esperanza instead of balling up on Yorba Linda Boulevard. And further, I want to get the people out of the neighborhood where the fire is, so I'm going to take them, and I'm going to take them across Yorba Linda and into the neighborhood so they can disperse out that way so I don't have the bottlenecks. Because as he's explained to me 4 times now in each meeting I've had with him, both on-site and off-site, it's not all about this particular area. It's about the whole picture, and that's what you need to do. And as he explained earlier, and I'll show you, he needs to put people out there to control the intersections. Alert OC, which is in existence now, which calls for people and as to when they're going to go ahead and evacuate, was not in existence in Yorba Linda at the time. It had been adopted earlier in 2008 in Orange County. It had not been adopted in Yorba Linda. The fuel was great because this was the first fire that hit in 28 years. And I'm sure a lot of you know in Blue Mud Canyon we had big black walnut trees and we had an abundance of things that have since burned, and the canopy was pretty good. Those things are gone, and typically what would happen then is over the next 50 or 60 years things would come back. Those of you that live close to it can see that non-natives are coming in and coming back, but the walnut trees themselves are showing very little growth, at least in that particular area. In other areas of the park, I think they're sprouting. Another big problem was the water booster pump failed. I know a lot of you have heard about this, but basically there was a water booster pump that was sitting over at Santiago, I believe, which is a reservoir that sits between Hidden Hills and this particular area. When that booster pump failed due to the fire, then it caused other pressure problems in lots of other locations. And so consequently, there was no water here to fight the fires, which is why you had a staging area down at the park, but no firemen up here to be able to fight anything because they just didn't have the tools to do it. The other thing we learned is that a majority of the houses that were burned or damaged were from ember fires. On the OCFA website and in that report, you will see that most of the homes in Yorba Linda that were damaged were not on the edge of the fire. They were on the other side of San Antonio, headed directly west from Blue Mud Canyon. And there were more of those burned. And it wasn't from direct radiant heat, it was from ember fires. And what we've learned is that they were built prior to 1995. And because they were built prior to 1995, they were built to different standards, and those standards don't provide for sealed eaves and so on and so forth, so consequently those houses are much more susceptible to fires. We also learned that the Casino Ridge subdivision built in 2004, which was built to a higher standard because the city of Yorba Linda kicked into gear, I think, sometime after 1996 and enforced new regulations. Those houses didn't have any houses lost. And also in the freeway fire, no houses built after the 1996 code were lost anywhere in the county. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so what's happened is the Yorba Linda City Council adopted OC Alert. I told you about that, and required that residential construction standards for homes to be repaired and new homes were to be built to higher standards. Also, all of the homes that were damaged by the fire had to be built to the higher standards. In addition, since that time, OCFA completed their after-action reports and their presentation, and they had multiple recommendations. Mike can probably cover some of those that I don't, but they have early alert, and what they also did was had areas where they had issues where there was overlapping fire responsibility And those caused issues because at the time the freeway fire broke out, a lot of equipment from OCFA and the other firefighting authorities were elsewhere because there were already 2 fires that were burning elsewhere in California. So they didn't have a full complement of equipment. They've since changed their mix of equipment, and they've also gone through and done more coordination between themselves, and they're going to have more of what they call emergency operation centers. The state fire marshal developed standards for ignition-resistant buildings, which is basically hardened homes, and those were adopted for very higher fire hazard severity zones. This was not designated as a very high hazard zone at the time by the state fire marshal because the maps hadn't come out yet, but the city of Yorba Linda had designated it as a zone with increased yields. So now those 2010 standards have been put in. And in fact, they put them in since then. I think we even are up another one. And then Yorba Linda Water District completed the Hidden Hills Reservoir and made a lot of other operational changes, which I'll show you. But basically, they were plagued by pressure problems in addition to the pump that failed, and Hidden Hills ran out of water. By the time the fire was up to it, there was very little that could be done for some of those homes. The Hidden Hills Reservoir is 3 million gallons. It's over capacity, basically, and that's one of the reservoirs that we originally thought, because it was so over capacity, we could draw water from. As I'll show you later, the Yorba Linda Water District decided not to allow us to draw water from the east for the same reason that we had the failure here, and has decided we need to draw it from the west. And then the Orange County Sheriff's Department designed the traffic control plan in 2013, and then OCFA adopted the Ready, Set, Go program for neighborhood emergency areas. When we were going through and talking to OCFA in one of our several meetings with them, they said, look, we have a Ready, Set, Go program that we're trying to promote, and it's a state program, and it's basically trying to educate people and get them once a year to understand what they need to do to evacuate, why they need to evacuate, what they need to do when they evacuate, and so on and so forth. And also to kind of practice it and have some familiarity with where they're going, particularly if they live in a very high fire hazard zone. They said, would you join with us and put into your community the Ready, Set, Go program? It's designed for existing subdivisions. We'd like you to put it into ours. And we said we would, which means that the HOA is going to have its own alert program. It's going to have its own program where it conducts training once a year, and it has people coming in. And as you'll see later, there's going to be fuel modification putting in, which the HOA will have monitored by an independent audit once a year, and it will be maintaining those fuel mods. That's important because most of the communities around us and most of the communities in Yorba Linda don't have HOAs, and so consequently, fuel modification that comes out of a house has to come from individual owners, and it's a whole lot tougher to police hundreds of individual owners than it is one big HOA. Next slide, please. This is a slide from the OCFA presentation, or the after action report, and this is the lessons that they show. It jives with everything that we learned, which is basically the ember intrusion was the biggest problem, water supply challenges was their second biggest problem, coordination, EOC stands for Emergency Operations Center, mass notifications because those didn't work during the freeway fire, and then the repopulation of residences, deciding when people can come back in and what steps need to be taken then. Next slide, please. They decided that on their mitigation and preparation that there needed to be some permanent measures put in place. I put the circles around these, and that's defensible space and construction features. We've designed both of those into our project. Next slide, please. Defensible space that they're talking about is basically fuel modification. And as you can see on this slide, this is an example of what it looks like. Fuel modification that they're talking about is basically a 170-foot zone. There's a 20-foot zone that's on your property that's supposed to be level. Then there's a 50-foot zone that comes off of that that generally will be irrigated, but it'll have fewer plants on it. And then another 50-foot zone that may not have to be irrigated, but it'll have fewer plants. And then another 50-foot zone. So basically, it's a gradual thing coming up. And the reason that they picked an uphill deal is because that's when the fire hits the greatest. It likes to travel uphill. Next. Here's our problem. If you look at our property and you look at what happened during the freeway fire and you look at where the houses burned, then you see that there's a plume that went down Blue Mud Canyon and it went across San Antonio. Yes, it burned some houses on San Antonio. It burned houses on Dorinda. It burned some houses on Stonehaven. But it burned a lot more houses on the other side of San Antonio. And that's because it shot the ember zone up. If you want to see a picture of what those houses look like or which houses were damaged, OCFA has it on its website. And when we went through this, and we went through it on a couple of windy days, what we learned is, this is Hidden Hills that we're looking at, and this comes down looking toward us. This thing becomes a wind funnel. Blue Mud Canyon becomes a wind funnel. So if you've got 40-mile-an-hour winds, they become concentrated and they sweep through there. There's not a lot of vegetation in there now because it got burned out before. But if you go through there and you walk through there and you look at the slides, or you look at the vegetation on each side, you'll see how the vegetation in the park has become something where it's non-natives, grasses, the type of thing that'll pick up quickly in a brush fire. It won't be as devastating as the type of fire you had during the freeway fire because there wasn't as much vegetation, but eventually, as it grows up, you're going to have the same problem again. So from our perspective, that is our number one problem once we understood it. That's what we needed to do something about. Next slide, please. So basically what we did was we went through and looked at the standards for hardened homes, and we adopted all those standards for hardened homes, and then we went one step further. They require sprinklers in the homes, but they don't require sprinklers in the attics for some reason. My partner's from Arizona. He's an architect. He puts sprinklers in the attics. So we've gone one step above everything else so that there are sprinklers in the attics of these homes. In addition, these red lines, orange and blue lines, are all of our fuel mod from the 150 feet that goes around it, and then the little blue line is the Zone A. What we've done in particular here is, this is Blue Mud Canyon, and we've taken Blue Mud Canyon and we're going to make it into a mitigation area. And the reason we need a mitigation area is because there's a little bird called Least-Bill's vireo. Least-Bill's vireo is a federally protected bird, and it has nesting locations apparently on the Cielo Vista property. If we get one of our access roads across the Cielo Vista property, then we're going to have some of the potential habitat for Least-Bill's vireo that we'll need to mitigate. So we've established a mitigation zone all the way through Blue Mud Canyon where we're going to irrigate and we're going to remove a lot of plants, and we're going to put in what we call California-friendly plants. And the California-friendly are about a 70% native, 30% exotic mix. And they have year-round color. They're more fire-resistant. They're more water use. We'll put them more sparse because we're also going to put a trail system down in there. And then in Blue Mud Canyon itself, we'll irrigate that and have that to where we have willows. We'll restore the walnuts, and so on and so forth. So irrigated plants, as Mike will tell you, is going to go a long way towards stopping fires as it comes in. But it isn't going to be enough. So what we did also, in addition to doing a fuel mod zone that's going to cover the entire bottom, is we have a 300-foot swath, and it's in an area where we can reach it from both sides with paved roads, and we're going to make that area more sparse and more fire resistant, so it'll form a break for the fires as they come in. So this should protect all of the neighbors that currently are in there, and it should help with the direct radiant heat fires that come through. There's still going to be ember storms that are coming from the other places, and the only thing that's going to stop your houses from from burning from an ember storm, whether it's coming from a fire 2 miles away or not, is for you to take some steps to harden your home as well. Next slide. Another option, it's option 2B, which is going out, one of the exits going out, and I'll cover that later, to San Antonio, and then a secondary exit going down to Stonehaven. Oh, by the way, on ours, the other thing that we're putting in is we're putting in 2 reservoirs. There's a reservoir that is at the top where that little blue line with the white dot in, and then this one right here. The reservoirs are located at the 1,200-foot and 1,390-foot elevations, and we're working with the Yorba Linda Water District to decide exactly where to put them and how much to put them on. Those particular water tanks, under the Northeast Area Planning Study that Yorba Linda Water District adopted in March, will provide the water for not only our project, but if we can make deals with the other developers and they play nice with us, for also the other projects in the area. So those would also allow the Yorba Linda Water District to put more water in this site, and right now we'll show you some slides later, but it'll fill a gap in their system. In addition to that, they have designed 8 booster pumps which will go over by the Fairmont Reservoir. And the purpose for that is so they can mix groundwater with the water coming out of there, and also have redundant systems. Because one of the things that they've done since the freeway fire is gone through and try to get redundancy in their system so that if one system fails, the other will pick it up so they don't have a repeat of anything that's gone on. Next slide, please. So our fuel mod is going to have the irrigated area. It'll establish the modification zone. It'll put the fire break zone in Blue Mud Canyon. We'll be removing non-native fire-friendly plants, and we'll establish fuel modification zones to be maintained by the HOA in accordance with those CFA standards. Next slide, please. The firefighting design features that we've got up here is that when we went to the OCFA and we talked to them, they also wanted us to design some staging areas in there. So we've got staging areas that are going to be designed on site. 2 of the staging areas will provide for 5 fire trucks, and they'll be fed by direct hydrants. So they'll be able to fuel up quickly and then go out and fight whatever they need to do. In a wildfire area, they don't stay in a static location. And then the 3rd one will be at the bottom of Blue Mud Canyon, and that's going to provide for 2 engines. The Blue Mud Canyon staging area, if there's a big fire coming through, won't be used, obviously, because it would be too dangerous. But if it's a grass fire or something like that, they'll be able to get in. So before, they didn't have any firefighting areas in there. Now they're going to have them. The reservoirs I've already told you about, and that's going to provide over 1 million gallons of water storage. And then the roads are going to be constructed for emergency egress and ingress simultaneously so that you'll be able to get vehicles out and you'll be able to get vehicles in at the same time. Right now, the only way they can get in there is the dirt roads that are maintained by OCFA once a year and graded in connection with easements owned by Southern Cal Edison. As I told you, all the homes would be built to the latest hardened home requirements with sprinklers. We'll adopt the Ready, Set, Go program, and we'll maintain an emergency alert system in addition. Next slide. This is the result. Mr. Huff will get up here and he'll show you what happens, but the slide on the left is where the fire would be and what would happen according to his computer software if nothing goes on our site. The slide on the right is exactly what's going to look like if our project goes on the site. It becomes a very huge fire break for you on the existing neighborhood, and it will provide you with more protection by putting you away from the fire and providing breaks there. Next slide, please. What happens is Yorba Linda Water District fills reservoirs, so they make sure that they're filled to capacity. In the case of the Hidden Hills Reservoir, they'll fill it up beyond what they would ever need it, so that they'll have extra water available. When the 2008 freeway fire came through, there was no reservoir at Hidden Hills. And so the nearest one was south down in San Diego. And that was a hole in their system that's since been repaired. And then they've got a mitigation plan where they go through with other water utilities, because all these utilities at some point in time have some connections. For instance, at the southern edge of our property, the Metropolitan Water District has a huge pipe that's going through. So now there's a lot more coordination between the water districts as to what they will do in the event of a fire. Next slide, please. This is just the things that they've gone through and done to overhaul their deal since the freeway fire. They've increased their pumps. They've added 7 million gallons of storage. If we go through and complete this, that'll become 8 million gallons of storage. Next slide, please. This is basically where we are. Hidden Hills is right up here. That wasn't built before. San Diego's down here, and then our property is right here. So as you can see, the next reservoir that really could serve anything is what they call the Little Canyon Reservoir, which is that one at the 1,000-foot level. So there's a hole in their system right now. And if we put our underground reservoirs in there, that fills that hole and also gives them redundancy so that they can go through to the Fairmount pump outs over here to the left, which are in green, increase those, and then they're going to run pipes up to Little Canyon to run down here. Right now, the Yorba Linda Water District has no excess storage capacity to serve any of these developments, so it has to be built on site. In order for it to serve the existing developments like the planned Cielo Vista, Bridal Hills, if anything ever goes up there in hours, you have to have elevation. I'm a layman, but basically you need to have about 130 feet above the maximum height of your highest pad. So that would mean that we need something along the 1,200-foot level, which we have designed, and the 1,390-foot level. There's insufficient elevation on Sage to put anything in there, and for other reasons, there's insufficient engineering and so on and so forth without a lot of construction costs to put it on Bridal Hills. So it pretty much has to come on our property. We spent an awful lot of money with our engineers talking to Yorba Linda Water District, talking to their engineers, designing things back and forth, and the design we came up with was to run pipes over from Hidden Hills to reservoirs on our site. They did the Northeast Area Planning Study, which they adopted in March 2013, and they said, we won't run water over from Hidden Hills. We know we've talked about it, it's not happening. I sat down with them and said, why? And they said, because again, Doug, that's going to create a single point of failure. We won't do it again. And that's why they're running everything from the west. Next slide. So what we'll have on site is the 1,200 and the 1,390 reservoirs, and they've got 1.3 million gallons zoned. That would be enough to go through and serve both us and Sage. And if we need to do more than that for any other reasons that they come up with, we would be willing to do that as long as we can get agreements with the surrounding developers. And then they would be serving it from Little Canyon, so they'll bring pipes from Little Canyon over and then bring it in there so that they keep the head pressure, because that's from the 1,000-foot elevation. Next slide. Basically, the two blue dots are where on the property the underground reservoirs will be. You won't be able to see them because they're underground. They won't agree to anything above ground, so they're going to be flat pads as far as you can tell. And then this is an engineering diagram that shows you basically the water pressures. Our civil engineers are here. If you have specific questions about water pressure, we've already gotten a couple people talking about them, then they can answer those questions. Next slide. This is the Yorba Linda traffic control map for evacuations, and this is what Lieutenant Wren showed people, but in just looking at this map, you can't tell very much unless you zone in on it. Next slide. So that's what we did. We took it and we took it into 4 different sections so we could see exactly what he was talking about. Next slide. This is the first section, and what he's showing here is the direction that he's going to have the traffic going. So he's going to have deputies at each one of these intersections, and they're going to capture the intersection. They're not going to allow traffic to come in, and they're going to set traffic going in whatever specific direction they plan on going. These are planning on going away from potential fires. However, since he's going to have radio control with these guys, he's going to put the people going in whichever direction he needs to make them go, and it's a fluid deal. So for instance, if you hit something, even in this particular area, where you decide, wait a minute, we want to go down San Antonio out to Yorba Linda, they may turn you around to go down to Fairmont, or they may have you going right on Yorba Linda, they may have you going left on Yorba Linda, or they may have you going down Yorba Linda for a very short way and dump you into neighborhoods. What he's not going to allow is the bottlenecks that have occurred before. The guy's experienced. I talked to him. He's done this in Laguna. He's done it in a lot of other locations, and he was here during the freeway fire and saw what happened with Brea. He told me candidly what happens is if you can't control the intersections, then you can't control anything. And nothing was controlled. There was no plan, and as a result, nothing was controlled, and that's why the traffic backups occurred. Next. This is another section that's closer to us. You'll see that the property we have is in the upper right corner, so he's bringing people down San Antonio, but then as they come onto Yorba Linda, he's putting them down Fairmount or Las Palmas. He's also told me that when Hidden Hills is evacuated, it's going to be evacuated and it'll keep going straight on west on Esperanza. He's not going to allow them to go up into Yorba Linda. Next. Same thing as you get further to the eastern part of the town, he's showing that he's going to keep the traffic on La Palma and take it on out away from the fire areas. Next. At the end of the thing you can. So the next thing that OCFA asked us was whether or not we would design an evacuation program for ours. And so we did. Gary went back and did an evacuation plan for our particular subdivision. And what that showed us was that we had to go in and we had to put in some additional roads, and which we've done, and then we put that evacuation plan in as part of our deal. And that evacuation plan, depending on the exit, will have a secondary access that's 28 feet paved, which is their minimum standards for an emergency exit. If we end up with option 2B, we'll have two secondary, we'll have two main exits are coming down. Next. This happens to be the 1-2B. This is one of our access options where one of our main roads would go out to San Antonio below everything, and then the other one would go down to Stonehaven on a secondary basis. Next. As part of the EIR process, we have to prepare a traffic study. And everybody has asked me about traffic. Our traffic study scope wasn't just the streets on our area. When we went to the county told us that to do your scoping, you need to go to the city of Yorba Linda because they know the roads better and they will tell you what the intersections are and where the areas are that you need to study. So this scoping study shows what they told us to do. Everything that's on there that's the little white dot is something that Kyle Mayberry studied. Because the mitigation doesn't just occur at Villa de Agua or Stonehaven and Yorba Linda. They made us go through and check traffic all along that particular area, and as a result, one of the mitigations is to contribute to, I believe it's a right-hand turn lane down near Savvy Ranch, and some other items which Kyle can explain to you. But the point is that this wasn't something that we came up with, that we decided the scope on. This is something that the county and the city decided the scope on, and that's why our study is so thick. And each one of those access options that we're studying are in there. So it isn't something where we're just looking at one little area. We're looking at the entire thing they told us to study. Next slide, please. The two collector streets we had to establish capacities on. So we went back to the city of Yorba Linda's general plan and found how those roads compared to what they described in their deal, because we've heard criticism that San Antonio isn't going to take on this traffic, and Stonehaven and Villa de Agua aren't going to take on the traffic. What our traffic engineer did was he went in, he compared them to what he did that was in the city's general plan, and he said these are most like 12,500 vehicle per day roads. One of the roads is 40 foot wide, one of the roads is 38 foot wide. But then when he got to Villa de Agua and Stonehaven, he cut that in half. And the reason he cut that in half is those, although they're wider, are more neighborhood roads. They can't stand the traffic, in his opinion. So he cut those in half and kept San Antonio the same. Next. In the Cielo Vista meeting, people ask, well, what are the capacities of the road? We had to come up with capacities of the road, and this is what we came up with. And we had to show what the existing vehicles per day were on each road. So we put traffic counters out there to find out what the existing was, and it's on this chart. So Villa de Agua had existing of 1,112 a day. Stonehaven had 1,966. And San Antonio had 3,530. Our project, which in our traffic study, since we knew that Bridal Hills could eventually put in 38 lots, we increased our traffic study to 378 instead of just 340, which will account for them whether they're ever built or not. So if you put that in there, then our project will add 2,351 on option 1 and then 1,266. Option 1 has both our emergency exit and our primary exit coming down to Stonehaven. What we prefer to do is to go down on what we call option 2B. If you look at our EIR, there are 4 options. There's option 1, which has 2 roads going down through to Stonehaven, which is the one that we have legal access to today. Option 2 has our emergency going out Stonehaven and then primary going up to Aspen Drive. Nobody that we've talked to likes that option, including the guy that's shaking his head who probably lives there now. And then option 2A goes through what's called the potential access corridor that's described in the area plan for Cielo Vista, and it winds around through that canyon and then goes out to San Antonio, south of all the existing homes on San Antonio. Option 2B is an option that we designed after more consultation with various people, and option 2B has our primary going in the same direction down San Antonio, and then a secondary access going down Stonehaven. And we've divided up the traffic saying roughly 65% is going to go out San Antonio and 35% is going to go out Stonehaven. At the end of the day, option 1 will take the level A, which is the best level you can have for traffic on Villa de Agua, and it'll turn it into a C. It won't affect the level A on any of the other streets. If we go with 2B, then all of the streets will remain level A. Next slide. This is how Mr. Mayberry calculated the trips per day. Basically what it comes down to is each home he put in, assuming that it would be 9.57 daily 2 trips a day. This is in the EIR, but again, and the 378 units that you look at, you go, wait a minute, those guys are telling us we're only going to put 340 in. Yes, we're going to put 340 in, but we have to account in these traffic studies for other developments. So you'll go through the traffic study and you'll see that we have to account for developments that are happening out in eastern Yorba Linda, because whatever traffic we generate has to be taken in context of whatever traffic they generate as well, because this was a wider scope. As soon as I'm done, I'll take your question, sir. Sure. Next slide. The other thing we had to do that many of you noticed was in California, if you're in an AP zone, which is an Alquist-Priolo zone, where there's an active earthquake fault, like the Whittier Fault, which we have, then they establish a zone that's basically a quarter mile from where they either know the fault is or where they project the fault is. In this particular case, the fault's never been specifically identified on this property. We needed to go through and figure out exactly not only where the fault was, but also figure out whether there were any other faults, whether they're active or not, within the AP zone. And so that's why we had a half-mile of trenching. We also had some earthquake zones on there, which is why we've done all the boring. We also had some soil issues on there, which is why we did the soil testing. So a lot of you have seen that out there, but what we found at the end of the day was we found exactly where the Whittier Fault was. And this particular slide shows the trace, and then what we did, this shows 100 feet, but we actually decided to offset 120 feet from there so that nothing gets built in there except roads, and those roads will have to be specifically designed for the earthquake fault. So you can see there's not even a lot that has anything bordering it. All of our lots are to the north of the fault. Next slide. We've been asked if the City of Yorba Linda general plan, whether we're consistent with it or not. We went through the City of Yorba Linda general plan, and basically, you can look at this, but they had this property set up for 630 units, not just our property, but the others as well. They had it set up for the density of 1 unit per acre. They had the residential uses being clustered, which is what we've done. They had circulation improvements to San Antonio Road and Via de Agua, or San Antonio, which is what we've done. And then you can see there were access easements that they were going to have because they wanted to have all of the properties, Bridal Hills, Yorba Linda land, the Nicholas Long, what we currently own, the Simmons property next door, and the Cielo Vista project, all designed on specific plans. Right now, our project is the only one going through on a specific plan. And then they wanted to complete the equestrian trail network. As you'll see, we have trails that are going to be going through along the northern edge of Blue Mud Canyon and connecting into the old Edison Trail and Chino Hills State Park, which is the only place the park would let us connect into. None of the property was designated as conservation or open space. None of it was designated as historic. None of it was designated as a wildlife corridor. Next slide, please. Our density is 0.73 dwelling units per acre, which is under the 1 dwelling unit per acre. And it's going to be approximately the same density as Casino Ridge. It'll be considerably less than all of the subdivisions and tracts around us. Next. These are basically our options. So on option 1, which is the one we do have legal access to, we'll go down through to Stonehaven, and our emergency exit will go through Cielo Vista. We have litigation going on with Cielo Vista who contests whether that easement exists or not, even though it's a matter of record. And the next hearing that's set up for that is, I think, in March, which is our summary judgment motion. Next. This was the option 2 that we put in there, which had our emergency access going out to Stonehaven and our primary going out to Aspen. As far as I'm aware, everybody that we've showed that to didn't like it. I will tell you, however, I got a comment today from Bob Wren, and I got one last Friday, and he said, well, for emergency purposes, I'm going to send in a letter to the county, and I'm going to say that I want you to put an emergency road up to Aspen, even if you're going to have your main one go out. He said, if I can get 4, I want 4. If I could get 5, I want 5. So basically what he's telling me after I took him out on site is, he wants this one, he wants the one going up Aspen as emergency only, he wants the other one going down here, which would be 2B, and he still wants a connection going into Cielo Vista, even though that's something that we wouldn't necessarily need. And he also told me today that he's probably going to comment and see what he can do about an emergency going out of Cielo Vista onto Dorinda as well. As you would expect, he's looking for every emergency access that he can get under any set of circumstances, because he wants something that if he needed to, he could bring the residents from the south through this development and then out, up, across Fairmont if something like that became necessary. We disagree with him, but nonetheless, I'm telling you, that's one of the things he's going to do. Next. This is 2A. 2A has us with emergency only going down to Stonehaven, and our primary going down to San Antonio. And next. And 2B has us going with exits to both, with this being more of a private one for residents only. And that's it. And I think that's the end of the slides. No, next. Okay. This is our open space exhibit, which basically shows that we've buffered the neighborhood from everything, and in Blue Mud Canyon pulled the lots back up on the hill and then back up in the other hill. You can see how that'll look because there is a study that's in the EIR that shows photographs from all the locations around this. Next. And this is another one which will show option 2B. This area down in 2B is because that's where we were told that many of the residents would want to park because they want a trail that would go around so that they could go on through Blue Mud Canyon and then connect. So we've included a park that would be down there just south of where we exit at San Antonio. Next. And we've got an animation that will show you what it'll look like when it's built. That'll take about 3 minutes, and then we'll be taking questions.
I won't be nearly as long as Doug was. If you'll indulge me on the first few slides, it's a lot about me, and I'm not here to brag myself up, but I thought it was very relevant that you understand a little bit about my background and what qualifies me to be here to do what I did for this project, which was basically I was retained to come in and review the plan and the fire protection features that were being provided for the plan and compare that with projects that I've worked on. My background, I have a background, my education is forest management with a fire ecology focus. I've been in consulting natural resources for 21 years, 17 of that here in Southern California, doing fire protection planning for a wide variety of projects. I'm a principal. I head up the urban forestry and fire protection planning group at a company called Dudek, which is an engineering firm. And then I have several certifications in wildland fire ecology, forestry, and arboriculture. I'm an active member of the California Fire Chiefs Association. I sit on the SoCal Wildland Urban Interface Committee, which is a code committee that routinely meets to discuss and implement codes that eventually find their way into the California Fire Codes. I'm an annual trainer at the Fire Prevention Officers Institute each year. And as I mentioned, we've done projects. Yes, sir. I'm getting to that. And if you have questions, please wait till the end. Thank you. We've done projects throughout Southern California, throughout the state, and most of my projects are in Orange and San Diego counties. That is missing a slide. But just for an example of the projects that we work on, I just finished this last year a project that was not so much fire protection related, but it included fire protection, but it also included a wildland open space area, the Nature Reserve of Orange County. It's the 36,000 acres of open space that you see across the 91 here, all the way to the coast. And that open space, like any open space, including Chino Hills State Park, is being hammered by repeated fires, and it's causing considerable damage to the habitat. So what our plan focused on there was reducing the number of fires, trying to help that go back or revert to the climax vegetation condition, which is actually much more ignition resistant than the non-native grasses that we're seeing out there now. I've done fire protection planning for very large development projects like Tejon Mountain Village in Kern County. That's basically several thousand units and 30,000 people on a 26,000 acre project site. I've done projects in Laguna Beach routinely, almost 10 a year over there for small projects, all dealing with implementation of fire protection on structures that are in high fire hazard severity zones. So it's very relevant to this project, and if you have questions further about my background afterwards, I'll be happy to answer those. When I was asked to take a look and review this project, we basically follow a standard protocol on any of our projects, and it starts with implementation of kind of the latest science that's out there, and there's a lot of research going on the wildland urban interface, and we try to apply that as much as we can to our projects. We follow typical risk assessment methods, so we want to learn everything we can about the fire environment which the project is sitting in. This is an overview real quick. We look at the site risks, fire history, fuels, weather, existing fire resources for response, access, fire behavior modeling we conduct. We're looking at the project for how passive its protection is. We don't want a lot of systems that require human intervention. We want it to be things that can stand itself out there, as did the Casino Ridge neighborhood. It didn't tie up Orange County Fire Authority resources because it could defend itself. It had a fuel mod and it had ignition-resistant construction. So those are the kind of things we're looking for. And then awareness, so the community needs to be aware, and it cannot just be a community that's in the wildland urban interface and not realize things that its residents need to know and do on a continual basis. We look at the fuel modification that they provided. We look at the infrastructure and the fire protection features. So real quickly, I'll go through our process. While we're in the field on the site, we're looking at topo, veg, we're looking at wind alignments, we're looking at any unique features that might facilitate fire spread. And on this one, as many of our projects, we have a recent fire for which we can go back and look and make sure that what we're seeing is how the fire behaved in this case, the freeway complex fire. That was the field portion. Then we get to the geographic information system portion, which is a powerful tool that we use. In this particular data is wind data, and the models will break down how the Santa Ana winds will flow through these canyons. So on this site, it's interesting that Mr. Wymore alluded to it. You actually have tunnels, wind tunnels on this project within a tunnel. So you have the 91 corridor, which funnels winds, and then you have on this site additional funnels, and it can create erratic, unpredictable winds, as you all know. This is our vegetation component. We usually get that from the project biologist, where each vegetation type is mapped, and we convert those vegetation types into fuel models to run that through a fire behavior model. We look at fire history. In this case, obviously the footprints of this and the Owl Fire are fairly close. In general, this site has burned twice, and other areas up north are burning a lot more frequently. This is the results of our basic fire behavior modeling, which in each of those vegetation types, we run it through an algorithm, and it spits out what the projected flame lengths, fire intensity. We can model the distance that embers would be thrown. All of that we can get, and pretty accurate. This is an exhibit we create that goes in then to OCFA when they're reviewing the work. And this lets them look at particular areas and see what those flames would produce. Then we run it through a more sophisticated fire behavior model called FlamMap. And that looks at the entire landscape. So we feed it the same kind of information across this landscape. The vegetation, the slope percentages, the wind alignments, and then we basically plug in what the weather is. We can do it for a summer fire, which would be a typical day, nothing major going on, and see how that will burn. Obviously, that's going to have lower results than if we pick a Santa Ana wind day, which in this case we picked the same weather conditions that occurred for the freeway complex fire. We look at the proposed land plan. We look at where the houses are, where the fuel mod is, if there are areas where the fuel mod is deficient. And we look at that in relation to the fire environment on the site. Then we take the land plan and we flip it on its side so that we can get a look at it from a profile view and just make sure that our predicted flame lengths are not going to impact the structures. So we're taking care of one of the main concerns, which is radiant and convective heat. The second concern then is the embers that Mr. Wymore talked about. The embers are actually, in any of these projects or in existing, the embers are the most important component, because the fuel mod and the new building codes really take care of the radiant and convective heat. Another thing we look at as part of the hazard assessment is how far away is the nearest fire station for response. In this case, we have our closest fire station, number 32, can arrive at the most remote portion of the project in just under 5 minutes. The standard in Orange County is for response in under 5 minutes, 80% of the time. So we meet that code requirement. So as our review of the project and assessment continued, obviously it's actually going to have to be consistent with not the 2010 codes, but the 2013 codes which are being adopted. There haven't been too many changes for the wildland urban interface areas, but it is a little bit more restrictive. The project had all of the ignition resistance already built in, the walls, the exterior walls, the windows, the vents. any of the appendages to the structures. They would all meet the ignition-resistant codes. It included interior sprinklers, which is a requirement. What's not a requirement are the attic sprinklers, which when we saw that, we couldn't believe it because we've not seen a developer actually do that voluntarily before. And it's part of this redundant layered system that we want to see for fire protection. There's no one component of the system that is relied on to prevent a fire from starting, because we know systems fail occasionally. So if we have a system fail, like for instance, the ember-resistant vents are meant to keep embers out of your attic. If one of those fails and an ember gets in and starts a fire, there's two ways that helps. We have a head up there or more heads that will likely extinguish the fire. The second part of that is it's going to set off an alarm on the side of the house that lets any responding fire engines that may be patrolling the area during a wildfire know that there's something going on. They can go in to the structure and take care of it. We look at roads. The roads on this one, the widths are great. They're much wider than even the requirements. All the cul-de-sac lengths, hose pull distances, hydrants are all at least to code. And they've added some strategically located fire staging areas and helipad, which of course is going to help the response, not only for the project, but for the area. This is one of the road system diagrams or exhibits that we were looking at when we were doing our analysis. The water improvements improve the reliability and availability for the area. The initial response time is good. Fuel modification actually exceeds requirements with the areas that Mr. Wymore noted. I'll just quickly go through the 4 zones at the top he talked about already. Those are requirements. Then we have the additional zones that aren't requirements. We have the fuel break zone, which is approximately 300 feet by 700 feet. We have the fire-prone vegetation removal zone. That's that large section in Mud Canyon, as is the fuel break zone. Special maintenance areas internally to the project. We can't let the internal areas go. That's even more critical in some cases than the external or perimeter. And then there's an irrigated riparian zone down in Mud Canyon. Now the key to this is, because even in HOAs that had fuel mod zones approved, say 15, 20 years ago, a lot of those haven't been inspected in the last 15, 20 years. And there's no telling what condition they are in. In this case, the HOA is going to fund that inspection. Where OCFA has not had the staffing or the funding to adequately inspect all of the fuel mod zones, this one's going to take care of that by getting someone like me out there every year and writing a letter that it either is or is not in compliance. That fuel mod zone is a critical piece of this, considering the high fire hazard that it's in, the zone. So it will be maintained to function as it's intended. This is just to point out real quickly the fuel mod zones. They do go around the community, and then these big swaths down here, which are effectively large fuel breaks. This one you just saw, but what I wanted to just point out is that these are actual model results. These areas, the irrigated, maintained landscape areas and fuel mod zones are all considered a certain fuel. It's an irrigated urban fuel within the models that we run. And it's basically projecting that the maximum flame lengths, if you get ignitions in here at all, are 1 to 2 feet that a firefighter can handle with a shovel or a water tank. The other thing, the project has a community evacuation plan and a very robust outreach for its citizens. It's going to have a web page. There will be fire safe council participation, drills with the fire departments, with OCFA. Another thing we did was we looked at potential evacuation trigger points. This was more for our own edification, if you will. And when you look at the after action reports, it took about 2 hours to 2.5 hours for the fire from its starting location to get to the area where the project is. And the typical evacuation time for a community like this is anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes or so. In this case, the community will fully endorse the Ready, Set, Go program. And what that does is it gets residents so that they are ready to go. They have their critical things in a box like I do at home, and when I need to go, I put that in my car and I'm out of there. It keeps them set. It keeps them, I understand. I understand. I understand. And that sounds like something that you need to start planning for. There's equine, there's horse groups that come and help. And if you don't have a trailer, but it sounds like you have a trailer. So as I was saying, our community will evacuate quickly. They'll be ready, drilled, and when they get the call to go, they'll be going, if not sooner. So why does any of the stuff I'm presenting matter? Because the after-fire reports and studies, not only from the freeway fire, but from multiple fires, indicate that the codes are working. The codes are stopping structures from burning that have been built to the codes. So these structures on the site will be built to the most strict codes in the country from fire protection. And I won't take the time to go through each of these, but the data supports that these houses will not burn.
Let's let everybody ask their questions in the manner that I outlined earlier. Otherwise, if you just yell from the audience, it won't get included in the final document. You'll have a chance, let him finish his presentation, and then I promise every single person here will have a chance to ask their question.
I'm on my last slide, sir. The conclusion after reviewing the project, applying our protocols for assessments and risk, is that the project will perform very well against wildfire. Further, it provides a net benefit to the area based on the fact that it creates a large fuel break which will change the fire behavior, reduce its spread rates and intensities through that area. Thank you.
Okay. Y'all hear me. As I described earlier, I've got comment cards that you filled out. If you haven't filled one out, please do so and raise your hand, and Roger will come. There's a couple of them over here, and pick them up. We're going to go in the order that we received them.
No. Why don't you allow it to be a free forum?
Okay,
Because-
okay, I have to go to the restroom before we do questions.
Okay.
Can I do that?
What we're trying to do
Can I?
is we're trying to get all of the comments on the record. Because we want to get them on the record, she needs to be able to take them down. Free forums, no, she cannot hear you, sir. If you want to come up here and talk, then we'll do it in order and everybody gets an opportunity to talk. First name.